ChatGPT drinks a whole bottle of water every time you ask it a question. AI is draining our water table, and those big tech companies are consuming billions of gallons while communities go dry. At least, that's what the media says. The origin for that claim traces back to an academic paper called Making AI Less Thirsty. Researchers calculated that training GPT-3 evaporated 700,000 liters of fresh water. The journalist who covered it then did some division, spread that across estimated queries, and arrived at roughly half a liter per question, so a bottle of water evaporated for a question with a chatbot. That research isn't exactly a lie. In July 2022, Microsoft's data center in West Des Moines, Iowa, pulled 11.5 million gallons in a single month during GPT-4 training. Iowa was in a 3-year drought at the time. So the concern is legitimate, but the scale of the claim is misleading, because when you actually trace where that water goes, the story gets more complicated. The same data center, running the same AI workload, could have consumed 31 times more water in one location than in another. Let's go over what it actually means when they say a data center uses water. Servers generate heat when they perform computing. Basically, all the energy used by a processor is directly converted into heat. So to keep the chips cool, the most efficient way to get rid of the heat is to transfer it into water. Since water is denser than air, it can absorb more thermal energy. The water flows to a cooling tower, which is essentially a giant evaporation machine. Hot water comes in, air flows across it, so when the water evaporates, it carries the heat away as vapor, and the cooler water returns to pick up more heat. For a typical 1,000-ton cooling system running continuously, about 45 gallons per minute evaporates into the atmosphere. Those water molecules leave the local watershed. They become vapor that might precipitate hundreds or thousands of miles away. It isn't lost completely to nature, but it might fall into a source that's not clean, like the ocean. So from the perspective of the river or aquifer you drew from, that water is gone. But evaporation isn't the only water loss. There is a second stream that's easy to overlook. As water evaporates, the minerals dissolved in it stay behind. Every cycle through the tower concentrates calcium, magnesium, and salts a little bit more. If you ever let that happen indefinitely, those minerals will deposit a scale in every pipe in the system, and the equipment would fail within a matter of months without being flushed. So they discharge some of that mineral concentrated water into the sewer and replace it with clean water. The discharge is called blowdown, and it accounts for about 20% of the total water a cooling tower consumes. Blowdown water goes to municipal sewer, flows to treatment plant, gets processed, and then is usually returned to the river aquifer. Hydrologists call this non-consumptive use because that water comes back to the watershed. So the math is 80% of the water evaporates and leaves the watershed permanently, 20% returns via the treatment plant until the total consumptive loss is 80%. Except that's not quite always true. If the sewer system drains water out of the local basin and it flows to a treatment plant that discharges it to a different river system or to the ocean, then from the perspective of your local aquifer, you have consumed everything you withdrew, and that blowdown doesn't come back. So what looks like 80% consumption in the accounting books is actually 100% consumptive, at least from the perspective of that groundwater system you drew it from. That distinction matters enormously in places like the Texas Hill Country, where data centers are pulling from the Edwards Aquifer but discharging to sewer systems that flow elsewhere. Companies report 80% consumptive use, but the aquifer is 100% depleted by that amount. Keep that in mind, but for now we can accept a basic picture of the water-cooled data center using about 80% of its intake water in evaporation, and the rest potentially returning to the watershed through wastewater treatment. The data center industry measures water efficiency using a metric called WUE, water usage effectiveness. Liters of water consumed divided by kilowatt hours computing delivered. An air-cooled data center, one that rejects heat only using fans and radiators instead of evaporative water cooling, would score 0 on that metric. And that's how it shows up on the sustainability reports. The thing about electricity is, depending on what kind of power plant was used to generate it, the process may consume much more water. Coal plants and nuclear plants work by boiling water to spin turbines. That steam needs to be condensed back into liquid to be cycled through again, which requires rejecting heat to the environment. Most plants do that with cooling towers. The same evaporative process data centers use, but at a vastly larger scale. A coal plant might evaporate 2 or 3 liters of water for every kilowatt hour it generates. Nuclear, about the same. Natural gas is more efficient, closer to 0.8 liters per kilowatt hour. Wind turbines and solar panels, on the other hand, don't need much cooling. Their water footprint is essentially 0. Researchers quantify that with something called the Energy Water Intensity Factor, or EWIF. It measures how many liters of water are consumed to generate 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, average across whatever mix of power plants supply a given region. And that is where location starts to make the biggest difference. California has a renewable energy grid. Lots of solar, lots of wind. The EWIF there is about 0.19 liters per kilowatt hour. Meanwhile, Iowa runs over 55% wind power, EWIF of around 0.45 liters per kilowatt hour. The national average, however, with its mix of gas, coal, nuclear, and renewables, sits around 1.8 liters per kilowatt hour. Illinois, which runs 30% coal and 50% nuclear, jumps to nearly 4 liters per kilowatt hour, and Louisiana, with 40% coal and 50% nuclear, reaches almost 6 liters per kilowatt hour. A 1 megawatt facility, including cooling overhead and infrastructure, draws roughly 16.6 million kilowatt hours per year. If you plug in California's EWIF of 0.19, you would get roughly 3.15 million liters of water consumed at power plants to keep that facility running. The same facility in Louisiana, with the same servers, workload, and perfect WE score of 0, multiplied by Louisiana's EWIF of 5.91, would get you 98.1 million liters of water used. So that's 31 times more water for an identical facility that could report 0 water use. The metric companies optimize and publish, the metric attributed to the data centers is roughly 20 to 30% of the actual watershed impact, with the rest hiding upstream in the power grid. An air-cooled data center in a coal-heavy region can impose greater watershed stress than a water-cooled facility in California, despite appearing more efficient on every sustainability report. And it's that catch that can reframe the whole conversation. To go back to that professor's claim, training GPT-3 evaporated 700,000 liters of fresh water. The number really includes both components, the direct facility water from cooling towers and the upstream water consumed by power plants to generate it. In July 2022 in Iowa, 11.5 million gallons consumed in a single month can show what intensive training really looks like at a facility scale. That is, real water leaving a real watershed during a drought. The local water authority's response was immediate. They told Microsoft any future projects would only be considered if the company could demonstrate technology to significantly reduce peak consumption during dry periods. But that's where the media coverage lost the plot. Journalists took the training consumption and they averaged it across the inference queries. They made it sound like asking ChatGPT a question and training the entire model in the first place were equivalent, but they're not. Training happens once over months. Training happens once, and then the model is reused for many months. Inference happens billions of times, but it costs orders of magnitude less energy per query. The bottle of water per question framing conflates a massive upfront training cost with ongoing lighter usage. And so the media coverage of the professor's research answered the wrong question. It personalized a systemic infrastructure problem into individual guilt. Meanwhile, the actual lever to solve the problem is grid composition and facility siting. The good news is that solutions do exist, and some have been operating for over a decade. At Google's facility in Douglas County, Georgia, they switched to 100% reclaimed municipal wastewater in 2012. That was sewage effluents that would otherwise discharge into a river, but now cools their servers instead. That required custom engineering, purpose-built treatment systems, upgraded materials to handle higher mineral content, and more aggressive monitoring protocols. But 15 years later, they haven't consumed a gallon of drinking water for cooling. In Finland, Google's Hamina facility pulls seawater from the Gulf of Finland through a quarter-mile-long granite tunnel. Since 2024, they've been capturing waste heat to provide 80% of the city's winter heating, and they've gone on 13 years of operation without touching the local freshwater supply. The technology that eliminates cooling water entirely would be direct liquid cooling. Dielectric fluid circulates through sealed channels directly on the chips, carrying heat away in a closed loop. So with no evaporation, there's no need for makeup water nor a cooling tower. It's simply filled once during construction and runs indefinitely. Energy efficiency improves by anywhere from 35 to 60% because you're no longer trying to cool the entire room of air. And unlike evaporator systems, it can work in any climate, from Miami to Phoenix. Most hyperscalers are already moving in this direction. In December 2024, Microsoft announced they had plans for a zero-water cooled data center using this chip-level liquid cooling, and they projected to save 125 million liters per year per facility. The only catch is timing. Pilot facilities for Microsoft won't come online until late 2027. So we have proven solutions, but the question is deployment speed versus growing AI infrastructure demand. So the viral claim that AI drinks a bottle of water per query isn't fabricated from nothing. There are real facilities consuming real water, sometimes during droughts, often without public disclosure, and the concerns driving those headlines are legitimate. But the framing does misdirect attention. It focuses on the visible water coming out of the cooling towers and evaporation plumes while ignoring the larger upstream consumption in the power grid. Direct facility cooling only represents 20 to 30% of the watershed impact, with the electricity source determining the rest. Training AI models in regions with clean grids like California, Iowa, and the Pacific Northwest would fundamentally change the water equation. The restoration projects and energy efficiency improvements companies tout in their sustainability reports do matter, but they matter less than where those facilities got built in the first place. And for the regions that are already water stressed, like the Texas Hill Country, wherein data center applications are piling up under non-disclosure agreements, Amazon CEO recently noted in their earnings report that the limiting factor for the data center build-out is not chips, but the grid. The raw need for power will highlight the concerns for how that power is generated and its impact. So the water conversation around AI is real, but it needs to be focused on grid composition and facility siting, not guilting people over their individual ChatGPT queries. The real way to solve the issue is through infrastructure decisions made years before anyone types a prompt.